From the Temple in Independence, Missouri, welcome back to CIMM Sessions, our little bite-sized servings of theology, culture, community of Christ, identity, mission, message, beliefs, and practices. I'm David Lloyd, the director of our CIMM, the Center for Innovation in Ministry and Mission, through the Community of Christ and Graceland University Seminary. We are really pleased tonight to have with us Glenn Johnson, who comes all the way from the Pacific Southwest Mission Center, where I hear it's a lot better weather than what we're getting here in the Kansas City area. There is snow out on the steps of the World Plaza as I'm looking outside in the dark. And but we're pleased to have Glenn as one of our seminarians who is presenting with us tonight. And his focus tonight is going to be on ministry to the unhoused, and what that has to do with his personal ministry as well as the life of a Christian seminarian. So welcome, Glenn. We're glad to have you, and go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much, David. It's an honor to be with you all tonight, and I hope that what I have to share on ministry with the unhoused will be helpful and meaningful. So let's go ahead and get started. We talked about this session as ministry to the unhoused. I sort of changed my title to ministry with the unhoused. This is Wyatt. He's one of our Friends Without Homes from the Welcome Home congregation in Covina, California, a few years ago. He looks a little like a pirate there in that picture, but he's a great example of someone who is unhoused, but is also a participant in the ministry. He went out with us every Wednesday with our love lunch deliveries in the community. And so I'd like to use with. And in fact, part of this comes with a story that Linda Reed has shared. Linda Reed was the pastor at the Welcome Home congregation, which had a primary ministerial focus on service to the unhoused and with the unhoused. And you'll see there in the Fired Up t-shirt a guy that had the street name of Hollywood. And Hollywood leaned over to Linda as they were serving food through the little window there one day and said to her, "Thank you for letting me be on the other side." And Linda said, "What do you mean? What's the other side?" And she said, he said, all my life, I spent time in prison, and, I've spent time on the streets without housing, and I'm always on the receiving end of the line. And here I can come and be a part of those who serve. And it was a very powerful and meaningful testimony about the dignity that comes in community as we live together. So just a word about my experience with the ministry among our Friends Without Homes. I served for 6 years as a plant team member and the kitchen coordinator at Welcome Home in Covina, California, and then I served there an additional 2 years as pastor. I then went to work for the church full-time, became a pastor at the Niagara Falls Lewiston congregation, where we had an active love lunch ministry modeled after the Wednesday love lunch ministry at Welcome Home. I then served as mission center president in a couple of mission centers, Lamoni Heartland Mission Center for 3.5 years, and then for about a year here in Pacific Southwest International Mission Center. Had a year-long battle with cancer and 5 surgeries, and now I'm pleased to be able to say I'm serving as the Peace and Justice Minister here in Pacific Southwest International Mission Center for Community of Christ. Just by way of introduction, the housing crisis is an urgent, complex human issue that is a part of our response to Christ's call in Matthew 25, when Matthew records that he says, "When I was a stranger, you welcomed me." So our challenge is to understand this not only theologically, but also as praxis. And today's journey will be a grounding ministry, hopefully in faith, context, community, and action. Some terminology might be helpful. There's a a literal understanding of this issue, which is simply that it's a lack of fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. People often ask, what are the causes of someone who's, homeless or homelessness? And the answer is they don't have a home. They don't have housing. It's sometimes it's just that literal and simple. But in a broader way, there's a disconnectedness, instability, systemic exclusion that's going on, and there are visible and invisible forms of being unhoused, sheltered, unsheltered, precariously housed, or sometimes referred to as underhoused. I'll quote a U.S. statistic here. We'll look at global statistics in a moment. There are over 582,000 people estimated that are unhoused on a single night, and rates are rising. The terminology, sometimes we get hung up on the political correctness of the terminology, and I think it is important to remember that words have context and different meanings to different people. And so to try to speak carefully, unhoused emphasizes, in some respects, the responsibility of the community to address the issue. Homeless is often viewed as a status or a descriptor. And homeless person tends to be a stigmatizing term that objectifies individuals. Experiencing homelessness is sometimes preferred. It describes being unhoused as a current condition, and it may also be a way of characterizing common effects or symptoms of living without housing. In Covina at Welcome Home Congregation, we came up with the term, and this is really Linda Reed that did this, friends without homes. And so we never talked about, he is homeless or this is a homeless member of our congregation. We all say this is one of our friends without homes. I think that invites relationship. It humanizes and it implies hope for returning to permanent shelter. It's also important to remember in our terminology that food insecurity is very closely related and aligned to the housing crisis and can be regarded as one of the effects of those who are unhoused. Globally, the world is facing an unprecedented housing crisis. According to the latest UN Habitat estimates, 318 million people are homeless. And 2.8 billion people, or over a third of the global population, lack adequate access to housing. Just to look at 4 countries, I wanted to start with Sudan. It's probably the worst housing crisis, largely due to displacement, due to the outbreak of war in 2023. But even prior to that, there were 3.7 million internally displaced people in Sudan, and another 12 million since April of 2023. There are a number of organizations involved in trying to ameliorate these conditions: the International Rescue Committee, the Sudan Relief Fund, the Jesuit Refugee Service, and others. So moving from obviously a country that experiences an enormous amount of poverty and is at the low end of the income or economic development spectrum to Australia, which is a relatively prosperous nation, obviously. There they have estimates of 122,000 people who are unhoused. And housing costs are high. There's something like 14 years of annual income that are required to purchase housing there. There are a number of organizations involved in dealing with housing solutions for those who are unhoused. Habitat, Mission Australia, the Australian Alliance to End Homelessness, and others. So others that are involved help treat the effects of homelessness. And we'll talk a little bit about that, the difference between treating the cause, which is lack of housing, versus some of the effects, and responding to those as ministry. Salvation Army Australia, Vinnie's, which is St. Vincent de Paul organization, and Orange Sky Australia, we'll mention. Now I'd like to focus on India, and specifically an example or a story from Outreach International. You can find this on their website. I think it's important to ask, what does it mean to find a home? Not just a shelter, but a place of hope and dignity. And Nalai was a widow, or is a widow and mother in rural Nepal, faced the challenge of insecurity and poverty after losing her husband. And her journey, supported by Outreach International, exemplifies the transformative power of community-led development. Invitation here to us, I think, as faith leaders, is how can we embody and facilitate ministries that restore dignity and agency. Her initial situation was that she and her children lived in a dilapidated hut. They were exposed to weather and insecurity. Social and cultural barriers compounded her vulnerability. And the intervention that came through Outreach International is in the way that they facilitated group discussions, enabling Nalai and neighbors to identify and prioritize needs. The local action group, supported with training and resources, developed a plan to build safer homes. And through collaborative effort, the participatory human development model of Outreach International, Nalai's new home became a symbol of safety, stability, restored dignity, and her own involvement in the process fostered leadership and self-worth. So these, I think, inspire us in terms of the dignity that comes through partnership. True compassion is involved in partnership, in inviting agency and co-creation. To me, this story reflects Jesus' ministry of restoring wholeness through communal action and empowerment. It's a sign of sustainable change. Solutions that are rooted in local leadership and participation can create lasting transformation. And Nalai's house is not merely a building, but a testament, if you will, to the beloved community that we are called to be a part of. I think there's a call to action for all of us here as Community of Christ leaders. You know, the question is, how can we nurture spiritual and practical processes that are kindling hope and empowering the marginalized and building homes of dignity for all? A place to call home, if you will, begins with recognizing and honoring the image of God in every person. That call in Matthew 25. Next, we go to Canada, from Nepal to Canada. There are essential questions here that I think were asked many, many decades ago in the 80s, actually, in Canada. And if we were to put words to that today, it might be, in our mission to embody Christ's love, how do we respond to the call for justice and dignity in housing? And CIMM was formed by Community of Christ members in Toronto. They were addressing urgent housing needs for vulnerable populations in what is, of course, one of the largest cities in the world. CIMM's origin and mission, they were established in 1982 by Mary and Rod Downing. I'm sure many of you have had the honor of meeting them, and other Community of Christ volunteers, and has continued to this day. The purpose of this organization to provide safe, affordable housing for older adults, to survivors of violence, to newcomers, and those facing homelessness for any variety of reasons. And this organization considers themselves to be inspired by restoration values of compassion, advocacy, and inclusive community. You can read about their approach on their website at CIMM and CIMM Group. So the model that they describe is one that involves innovative approaches. It's a holistic model, integrating affordable housing, providing actual physical housing with supportive services, such as counseling or social activities or community building. And it's also a collaboration. So it's a partnership with government agencies, local organizations, and the faith community, including the CIMM organization formed by these Community of Christ members. It's been recognized for excellence. In 2023, the Canadian federal government recognized them as a national model for addressing housing insecurity. And it's an example to us. The residents have experienced stability and belonging, reflecting the church's vision of shalom, I would suggest. For example, some of the testimonials that come include residents, saying that it restores hope and dignity. So it's about more than just physical space, as important as that is, but also the social dimensions of home and what that means. So, as a model for housing justice in Canada, I think we can ask ourselves, and how can the rest of us perhaps consider, think about, and respond to this? I think the example is a great example of praxis, a term we like to use in seminary, of living out our faith through social transformation. And it invites us to discern how our communities can similarly partner for justice and restoration. So, what can we take away from this example? I think the Cianito story challenges and inspires us to be co creators of just, compassionate communities and to ask ourselves the question, how might we as ministers and scholars foster similar models in our contexts where housing justice and the gospel of peace intersect? The powerful thing about this example is that they address the issue of housing first. They took it head on. When you're confronted with an issue of the fact that people are unhoused in your community, we can treat symptoms, and that's important. And sometimes we only have enough resources to treat symptoms. We may not have the resources to deal with causes. But this is an example where we can actually deal with the cause, which is the lack of housing, and finding ways to provide housing. So kudos to John Hamer and all those who lead this effort, contribute to this effort on an ongoing basis in Canada. And you see here, by the way, in the upper left, the image of a place where they just did a groundbreaking a couple of years ago for a new facility. I believe it's 185 units, something like that. So, since this is a seminary presentation, I think it's important to talk about scriptural foundations for ministry to the unhoused. And I think there's a thread throughout the scriptures. I hope that this isn't, cherry picking of scriptures, but rather, a reasoned attempt to find common threads. Isaiah and the prophets so often talked about, and throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the various ways of providing for the poor. And in third Isaiah, we read this statement: "Is not this the fast I choose, to bring the homeless poor into your house?" The Gospels, of course, are filled with stories of Jesus' table fellowship and the almost, heavenly vision in Matthew 25, the parable of judgment, and where acts of mercy are seen as acts toward Christ or toward Jesus. In the Jerusalem church, in Acts 2, of course, we read about how they held all things in common and they were caring for one another. In the texts of the Pauline letters, we come to understand them as share communities where feeding the hungry was an important part of what they were doing. And to jump ahead to modern times in Community of Christ, words and sacred texts, God, the eternal creator, weeps for the poor, displaced, mistreated, and diseased of the world because of their unnecessary suffering. Such conditions are not God's will. Open your ears to hear the pleading of mothers and fathers in all nations who desperately seek a future of hope for their children. Do not turn away from them, for in their welfare resides your welfare. So, in addition to the scriptural foundation, other theological foundations can be found in the idea of imago Dei, that every person bears God's image. All are invited into a community of generosity. There's a theological concept of divine solidarity, of Jesus the unhoused. it's suggested, for example, in Luke that Jesus said, foxes have holes, but the Son of Man, has nowhere to rest his head. And commenting on this passage, Daniel Harrington in Sacropagina, the Gospel of Luke, suggests that the life of a philosopher, which he would have considered Jesus to be, can demand homelessness, is made clear by writers of the time, such as Epictetus and Dio Chrysostom. Justice and compassion, I might also suggest theologically, are central to God's reign. We may even understand this intuitively as members of Community of Christ and friends of Community of Christ, that this is a part of what we are called to do. And it is also a restoration principle. Our call to embody shalom, healing, and belonging or reconciliation is embodied in our temple, for example, and returning persons to a status of being housed, I would suggest, is an act of reconciliation. We reconcile by bringing people back fully into community. So we're often asked to look at our theology versus praxis. And this may be a false choice, but there is the idea of orthodoxy, right belief grounded in scripture, tradition, and reason, and orthopraxis, which is right actions or living out our faith in concrete ways. What may be ideal is an integration of the two. Ministry that is transformative encounter where faith seeks justice. I'll pause just a moment to highlight the photo on the left. This was an Easter Sunday service at the Welcome Home congregation in Covina. It was a communion service, and I love how we arranged the space for this service. We formed the tables where for the banquet that was shared in the form of a cross. It was cruciform, and it meant that the fellowship hall where we usually dine spread into the space of the sanctuary, and it became one place. And it was a banquet for royalty. We brought out our linens, we brought out our best plates, and tried to create an environment that really welcomed everyone as honored guests. And I think this is an example of how congregational life can become both a way of living out our theology and our praxis. So I did an internship as part of my Community of Christ master's program in peace and social transformation, which is one of the two majors offered by Community of Christ Seminary for those who are seeking the graduate program. And in the internship, I prepared for that with 100 days of exhortation and prayer. That preparation was one that took me to places like the Hope for Home Services Center. Each day I began with the mission prayer. I had a spiritual practice of beginning with the mission prayer, of reviewing the day's news and stories, and then choosing a place based on that, somewhere that I could get to and offer a statement on social media, of course, of exhortation and prayer. So I posted all of this to Facebook, 100 days. So I went to the border, I went to the LGBT Center in Hollywood, I went to, the Panamanian consulate, to homeless centers, to hospitals, to schools, to national forests and water reclamation projects and streams, and just every day that I could find an issue of importance in our world, just tried to go there and share both a meaningful statement of exhortation and offer prayer that often involved confession and an acknowledgement of complicity in all of these things that we're talking about today. So I also, as preparation for this project, did a pilgrimage in search of Pauline share communities. So I went to Turkey and Greece, to Ephesus, to Athens, to Corinth, to Thessaloniki and Berea, and Philippi. Um, about these Pauline communities, especially the ones for which we have the New Testament letters, which stand out the most perhaps in our minds. Um, the First Paul, which is written by Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan, in that text, they theorized that his communities, which they called communities in Christ, by the way, were such that we would call them share communities. And by this, they mean communities in which there was a sharing of material as well as spiritual resources. Um, and they based this on three pieces of evidence. First, based on the fact that of Jesus' focus on bread, of his table of ministry, of the ministry to the poor, the gospel to the poor, and so forth. So it was just a fundamental part of Jesus' ministry. It's hard to imagine that it wouldn't have been a part of Paul's ministry as well. Secondly, based on the conditions of the time, the economic fragility of ordinary people in the urban environment of Paul's activity. Paul, of course, having gone to a lot of Roman capitals, provincial capitals, and cities where there were synagogues, so larger urban areas by the standards of the time. And then thirdly, there's evidence in a couple of post-Pauline letters, interestingly enough, 1 Timothy and 2 Thessalonians. I'll comment on 2 Thessalonians here and just share that with you. The author of this letter likely being a non-Pauline source, but someone writing to that community in Paul's name. The recipients of the letter would have probably known that Paul had passed, but would have accepted it in Paul's name as a sort of a spiritual channeling, if you will, of his message. For even when we were with you, we gave you this command. Anyone unwilling to work should choose not to eat. For we hear that some of you are living in idleness, mere busybodies, not doing any work. Now, such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. Brothers and sisters, do not be weary in doing what is right. Well, this at first blush, this may seem like kind of something that goes against the idea of helping those who are in need, but that's not what this says at all. What in fact it proves a couple of things. First of all, it proves that these Pauline communities were sharing. And they were sharing communities. They were providing food. They were providing resources to those who lacked those resources because of the economic fragility and the conditions of the time. So it kind of shows that there was, because this person who wrote this letter felt there was a problem, it means that there was a ministry being shared. Also, the emphasis is on the individual who's receiving the ministry. They're the ones who are being asked to change their behavior. The church is not being told not to do this, quite the opposite. In fact, that final statement seems to be a statement to those who would be listening to this letter, likely the leaders of the church in Thessaloniki. And there is the encouragement even of this author writing in Paul's voice is, brothers and sisters, do not be weary in doing what is right. Continue to offer your ministry. But yeah, folks, if you don't need it, go ahead and use it. And one of the possible challenges as to why this was occurring is that there was a great belief in an imminent second coming at that time. And so their eschatological beliefs may have led them to say, well, let's just sit around and wait for the return. And this is sort of a sense, as things were moving forward, another decade is going by and so forth, it's time for us to remember our responsibilities as well. I was thrilled in Thessaloniki to find this place that you see in the picture here at the bottom, which may seem strange because it's graffiti. It's not necessarily a really beautiful urban image, but this was actually a ministry offered by the Church of St. Demetrius, the largest church in Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki is the second largest city in Greece after Athens. And the sign was Greek to me, as the expression goes. So I took out my app, took a picture of it, and you can see that this is a ministry that offers meal for the poor and homeless 5 days a week, and it's put on by this Church of St. Demetrius, as well as what it would be called a metropolis in the Greek Orthodox Church. We would call it a mission center. Catholicism or Episcopalians would call it a diocese and so forth. And then the municipality or the city of Thessaloniki as well. So in my project, I worked on ministry to the unhoused in Temple City, California, where we have a congregation that is a storefront ministry. And so it's ideally situated to reach people who are unhoused. The building rent and utilities are funded by the Mission Center. The pastor there is Daryl Kelty. He's 82 years old. He's there 6 days a week from 10 to 12 in the morning. And he also coordinates very closely with the Temple City Coalition for the Homeless, or the Homeless Alliance, whatever. They have a couple of different names, actually. The Alliance president is Wendy McGrail, who is an Episcopalian layperson. Daryl acts as the treasurer. And they have a couple of regular volunteers, Brian, who's another Episcopal layperson, and Tom, who's a Methodist layperson, who's there 6 days a week, along with Daryl. And he's also an example of ministry with, as he happens to be an unhoused person. The situation for homelessness in Los Angeles County, where Temple City is located, is in crisis mode currently. Even though the voters have been very generous, a few years ago, they voted a 0.25 cent sales tax to go specifically to programs for homeless. And then just last November, they actually a year ago, November, they passed another 0.25 cents. So there's a half a cent sales tax, which is a lot of money. And a lot of buildings and housing can be built with those funds, but it's been very poorly managed. And so the Los Angeles County has pulled out of that organization, meaning that the funds are being split in two, with the LA City having a big portion, LA County have another very large portion. It's kind of a mess. And as you can see from this list of organizations, there aren't a lot of homeless coalitions in Los Angeles County, surprisingly. That doesn't mean there aren't other organizations. There are many agencies and organizations, but it is a challenging situation, to say the least. So as I approached this project, I had some goals, but I decided to use Crable's model of agape love, which is one of the texts that I had the joy of reading in seminary. The Upside Down Kingdom by Donald B. Crable. He's a Mennonite minister, as I recall, and he suggests this model of agape love, which is, first of all, make the first move. Do not act in response to a favor received. So this isn't my community. I haven't received, benefit from them necessarily. The other element of the model is to serve others regardless of status, and to not expect a return, to encourage others to pass it on. So I thought that rather than going into like a smart, a model, a lot of us have talked about goals with, SMART, where it's measurable and attainable and, all of those things, which is a very valid approach. But because of the nature of a practicum being, just a few hours of service, and a short period of time, I wasn't really reinventing the wheel. This was a ministerial program that was currently in place, but I was entering into and participating with that. So I liked Crable's model for that purpose. We also were asked to look at, a the model for ministry that we were utilizing, and I used Simperman's 7 movements, which are contained in her text, Social Analysis for the 21st Century. We don't have time to go into this, but it's a model that is a cyclical model, starts with envisioning, setting priorities, creating models, experimenting, which is really important, getting to work, assessing and revising, and repeating as needed. I more or less followed that model. And by the way, there's a great picture of Daryl sitting in his tiny little office there in Temple City, California. The church you see on the left here, that's it. That's all there is. Just this very small retail space, and you can see people crowded in there, getting food. A couple of tables set up. I made ham one day, so there's Lisa, the volunteer on the right, cutting the ham. I was really relieved because I wasn't really sure how to cut a ham, to be honest, even though it was like one of those spiral sliced ones that you can buy at the grocery store. But we tried to serve really good food for folks. That's why I wanted to show that picture. We're just treating a symptom of homelessness here, obviously, which is food insecurity. But there are a number of issues on a daily basis that Daryl is dealing with, coupons for haircuts and a lot of other things that are aimed at transitional support for people trying to get into housing as well. On Wednesdays, a meal is served in the park. You see the Sisters of Mercy here serving this meal in the park. You see Daryl sitting patiently waiting for everyone to be served. So this is a regular Wednesday activity of this ministry as well, as part of the effort of the Alliance. And then after the meal in the park, Daryl goes, and I had the honor of joining him, to the laundry, which is right across the street from the park, as you can kind of see from this picture that shows there's a street in the middle, and then there's a laundromat. And the people line up, they get $3 in quarters. In order to operate the coin-operated machines at the laundry. They get a detergent pod, and then they go inside and are able to do their laundry. And it was really surprising to me is some of the stereotypes that this helped to break down for me, because that a lot of the people who were waiting there were visibly elderly Asian Americans. And there's a stereotype that all Asian Americans are wealthy, right? All are successful. And that was just very clearly not, the reality. Probably because of immigration status, it wasn't really clear. But, there are people in need in all ethnic groups and situations of national origin. So this experience taught me that there's a lot of tactical things that we can do that address technical challenges, offering food and other services to the unhoused, even offering housing. But there are adaptive challenges that we need to take on that are bigger issues, confronting the causes of systemic injustice, speaking truth to power, building awareness, advocating for policy changes, and taking direct action. So I think the opportunity for me going forward is to implement what I call the awareness, advocacy, and action model, which is simply to build awareness, to advocate to those who have the ability to implement policy, and then to as well take action ourselves in all of the dimensions of that, from the example of Cianito to the example in Nepal for Nilai, and to the examples of the various congregations that are providing this kind of ministry. So some thoughts on approaching ministry in your context. Assess your community. The picture on the left is where Kenny and Jerry lived. It's just like a crawl space underneath the road there in near Covina, California. We need to look into our communities. What are the situations in our context? Who are the unhoused in our city? What forms does homelessness take? here. And you can take an asset-based approach, by listening to the local stories, to the data, and to unhoused persons themselves for information about what's going on in your community. And I know at Welcome Home, we found that that was often the best resource of information, was to talk to those who were experiencing homelessness themselves, in order to find ways to address the needs of our friends without homes. Assess your congregation resources spiritually. Engage in prayer, hospitality. What is your capacity for empathy? Consider doing 100 days of prayer exercise in which you ask yourselves and ask God, how can we approach the issue of the unhoused in our community? Obviously, material resources. What are our facilities, our funding, our volunteers? What do those look like? Very importantly, look at relational networks, at alliances that can be formed, relationships with local agencies, your mission center, other congregations, ecumenical and interfaith alliances, government, etc. And then assess whether, the resources that you have are aligned, and the things you're thinking of doing in terms of our enduring principles. Find allies. I was actually at a nonviolence training, and I came across this labor union leader who had this wonderful shirt: "Abolish poverty, abolish homelessness." It's so cool. I gotta get a picture of that one. But you can get involved in organizations that help to provide you with connections and allies: ecumenical and interfaith partners, local social service agencies, government officials, advocacy groups, your community organizations, just lived experience from the unhoused community. And of course, the idea being that the body of Christ is larger than any one congregation, any one denomination, even any one faith movement, even. So it's important, I think, to find your story. What is your origin story? How does it compel you to respond? What was the need that you saw initially? What is your vision in response to that? How did you respond to it? And in doing that, find meaning, find passion, and refine your story to make it relatable and invitational so that you can do things like this amazing groundbreaking that Cianito Housing was able to participate in. And it's important to collaborate with our friends without homes, to really bring people into the process. You see Steve here, standing at Welcome Home with Buckhorn Camp, which is our campground here locally, signs behind him. And then on the right, you see Steve standing in front of some daylilies that he helped plant the year before. He was so incredibly proud to get his picture taken in front of his work that he'd done, his service that he provided to Buckhorn Camp and the campground. And I just think it's a wonderful story that kind of emerged out of all of this. When we first found Steve, he was living in an RV, but he had no land tenancy. In other words, his RV was on the street, and the police would come by, they'd put chalk on it, and he'd have to move. And sometimes they'd put chalk on it and they'd put a ticket at the very same time, which meant they weren't really being fair to him, at least according to his story. And I tend to believe him. So anyway, the ministry with is important. Moving from ministry to the unhoused to ministry with the unhoused, valuing the lived experience of all, including people in advisory roles, co-leadership, storytelling, and so forth. Using a friendship model, developing meaningful relationships that go beyond labels, and a model of dependency. And Steve, I think, is just a great example of that. By the way, Steve was involved in serving our love lunches every Wednesday as well. So we'd go out in the car and help deliver them to other people. Even after he found housing, he did find housing, by the way, through a program that he researched and looked into for veterans. It's important to start small. To have a consistent presence showing up matters. And so it needs to be small so that you can sustain that. It needs to be attainable. You can do things like research and referrals and helping people to get their IDs, providing them with a mailbox, providing them with paperwork help. These are all things that actually help to get people into housing, and that they may lack. It's been our experience that's the case. Yeah, and yes, you can provide community meals that also help to provide the capacity for people to focus on the issues that face them. So sometimes it is small acts, providing water or socks or a charging station. This is suggested by the scripture in Matthew, the cup of cold water. So you need to obviously then, once you have a plan in motion, to rework and revise it, checking in regularly, what's working in our program, what needs adjustment. Maybe we can start looking again at best practices. How are others approaching this issue that we discovered that we didn't know we were going to discover? Soliciting feedback from your stakeholders, especially the unhoused participants, and then reminding yourself to not just take a technical approach, but to an adaptive approach, and willingness to change direction is sometimes needed for this. The National Alliance to End Homelessness is a great resource for information for those congregations looking to address this issue. Here, for example, they provide the 5 keys to effective emergency shelter, which is this housing first approach, safe and appropriate diversion, immediate and low barriers to access, housing focused rapid exit services, and data to measure performance. So you can really take a deep dive into that information if that's the direction that you're going in. Then an assessment and evaluation phase is needed. It should go beyond numbers to the relationships built, the dignity affirmed, the systems that have shifted. I think storytelling is a part of that assessment and evaluation, sharing the impact narratives that people have, and then the theological reflection. Are we becoming a more just, compassionate community? I can remember we did a dinner church workshop in Ames, Iowa, Linda Reed and I, and the question was asked, if the congregation closed, after 10 years, this emerging congregation closed, then what was the success? And implied in this question was, what did it do for the church? How did it help the church to grow? And I think that's the wrong approach to the question. The real answer is in each moment of ministry that's offered, and that was kind of the realization that I had in that moment, is that it's the face of each person, the image of each person served, their name, their being honored in community. Every meal that was served, and we served tens of thousands of meals in those years that we did this. Identifying needed actions then. Where are the gaps? Do a process map, continual discernment based on the assessment. So I want to conclude because we're running out of time. Again, going back to the theological implications. In seminary, everyone's familiar with Daniel Migliore and his book, Faith Seeking Understanding. There's a fantastic quote in there where he says, "Have the church and theology neglected the clear answer of Matthew 25, verse 31 and following to the questions, where is Christ? And how shall we recognize the true church? Christ is among the poor, and the church is the people of God, free enough to enter into solidarity with the poor." So right there from Migliore, profound theology related to the very question that we're talking about tonight. And Migliore's description of the church as people free enough to act suggests the need for liberation. And that's the kind of point I wanted to make. This goes to Gustavo Gutierrez, who was sort of channeling Schillebeeckx when he suggests that the church has ignored orthopraxis in favor of orthodoxy. And so I'll just offer the Glenn Johnson corollary here. The church needs liberators. And each moment of service matters. Each person served matters. Each person empowered to serve matters. I see Community of Christ as a community where everyone gives and receives. God's preferential option for the poor is made visible through tangible acts of love. The cry for justice is empowered through action. It's not enough to demand change. We have to be a part of the change that we're demanding. And finally, I'll leave you with the statement to remember housing first. I'd like to offer a prayer as we conclude here. God of justice and compassion, who shows us the worth of all persons and the dignity of all creation, we remember before you all who are unhoused, those visible, our friends without homes, and those unseen, our friendships to be formed. Grant each of us, those with housing and those without, the courage to listen, the wisdom to act, and the humility to walk alongside. May our ministries reflect your love and our commitment to abolish poverty and end suffering. Help us to be fully awake and ready to respond, that we, with all your children, may find a home in you. Amen.
Wow, Glenn, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation today, and a whole lot of information. And I got a couple of questions. I know our time is short here, but for crying out loud, we have to get in our minds, those of us in Community of Christ, if we spent as much time on the poor as we spent on the Sunday morning service, we would be doing a better job of living the gospel. A lot of times we get stuck in thinking that the main purpose of our being is to put together that Sunday service. And we need more experiences like this where we start asking the difficult questions. What are we doing that Jesus asked us to do? And I think this is a great way to begin getting some of those gears greased and moving along that area. So let's talk about the unhoused. I really appreciate the helping us through the terminology at the beginning there too, of talking about how we are doing a ministry to our friends without houses. I think Linda's statement is a real good one to keep in mind as we're talking about this, because it puts us more personally connected with those folks. I know every community is different in regard to the housing issues. In the various places that you've lived, have things been easier, more difficult, depending on your location?
I think there's been challenges everywhere. I've seen, a need for a ministry to the unhoused everywhere. Even in Des Moines, I lived in West Des
Oh,
Moines.
yeah.
You think of Iowa as being, kind of a economically strong area, but there's not only rural poverty, but even in Des Moines, the Northwest congregation in particular was involved in a lot of good ministry through DMARC and other organizations in that area. So yeah, I don't think there's an area anywhere within my personal experience, which is unfortunately is limited, to the United States, where there isn't an important issue of persons who are without homes.
Yeah, I remember even being in Hawaii and seeing, and again, it shocks you back into reality that even in a place like Hawaii, there would be houselessness, and in small rural cities and towns, there are those issues, and a lot of it depends on us and how we connect with those organizations who are working with those people. I think a lot of times we get frustrated because the issue is too big and too far out of our own wheelhouses. and we think that our little congregation can't do much. What is one suggestion you can give to a congregation who wants to get more involved with working with our Friends Without Houses?
Sometimes the thing that's missing is the will to act. And so all of the resources could be there. Los Angeles County is a great example of that. There's literally, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars available, but the political will, the determination isn't necessarily there. And so you may just be the person who catalyzes that for your community. And most of us live in communities that are smaller than Los Angeles. We're
Absolutely.
addressable and refinable. So yeah, I think to remember that you can be in alliance with others. You don't have to provide the entire solution, and that can network and collaborate with other organizations. And it's not important or necessary that the church's name or label be on the front page of the ministry that's being offered. And I think we have to be willing
Right.
to give that up at times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot that can be done just by being a part of the solution, and perhaps being a catalyst for action.
And choosing to search out those organizations within your community that are doing this as a job. I see a few people with their hands up. If you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the chats, and we'll get to it as we go through. I really appreciated you also dealing with the theology, and so here's the last question I'm going to ask tonight before we get to the rest. In regard to theology, we have heard a number of other Christian faith groups who have used that Second Thessalonians scripture to say this is why we shouldn't fund it through the government. The Christian church should be taking care of it. Well, first of all, the Christian church isn't taking care of it, and second of all, it's a way to throw this off the responsibility for those who might not be living up to their full potential, I think is how I hear a number of groups say that. We definitely have a different mindset in regard to how we see the poor, and hopefully take on some of that as part of our responsibility as Christians. So without waxing too political, but still recognizing the need, how do we counteract that kind of theology that it's not up to the government to take care of the poor?
Well, I think part of the responsible interpretation of Scripture is to realize that most of the Scripture that people are referring to is from 2,000 years ago, when economic sophistication was far less. We have a much more interdependent economy than even existed in those times. And so it's impossible to think of solutions that don't occur without, our democratically elected governments getting behind some of the solutions that need to take place, in my opinion. And, the church definitely has a role and a responsibility to play. And I speak of the church in the broadest ecumenical sense of that, and even in the interfaith sense of religious communities and other nonprofit organizations. But they cannot do it alone. And so there is a government component. But often that means that government funding is available for faith-based organizations who want to be a part of the solution.
Great, great. Jody and Rich are asking, is the paperwork still on paper? Is it online forms? I've heard the forms can be very confusing.
Yes, the forms can be very confusing depending upon where you are. I'm sure they vary greatly, but there's a lot of catch-22s, as the expression goes. You have to have ID. You often have to have a mailing address, and you have to have residency proof. Quite often in some states, and so it can be very complicated sometimes to get the assistance that you need. And so it's helpful sometimes to have a mentor who can help you through that process. Who can, churches that just set up, mailboxes in their entryway for those in the community that don't have a place to have mail sent. It can be extremely beneficial. It's a very simple ministry.
Yeah.
Just get one of those, slots that you have it for office memos,
Yeah.
it just set that up in your church and put people's names on it, and they can get their mail there. Now,
Right.
you'll have the issue of, 2 years worth of mail piling up, but that's okay.
Yeah. But and I think we also need to look beyond what is the classic houseless people. There are many ways that we as individuals can also help people. We have a large number of people out of high school and college who sometimes turn up houseless. And other ways that we can. I know a number of congregations are serving as warming centers during the cold winter months who live in temperate zone. And so there's a number of ways that we can be involved. And I think that's the one thing we want to encourage everyone is start considering, especially during this time right now as this is being taped. This is during the Advent season, as part of our Advent journey of preparing ourselves for a person who, during his birth was houseless, and what it means for us to respond to that. So I really appreciate it. Do you have a link for that 100-day program that you mentioned that you did? Any kind of thing?
It would just be my Facebook page is where I posted those videos.
Can you give your Facebook page?
I don't know if it's just Glenn Johnson on
Okay.
Facebook, but if you're a member of Community of Christ, you probably will see my name early because I'm connected to a lot of people in Community of Christ.
I'll look it up when we edit this, and we'll put it on the screen for everybody.
Yeah, I don't know what the exact link is. Sorry.
Yes, no problem. Well, a lot of thank yous coming your way on the chat page, and wonderful topic to share today and to share with everyone. We got one more comment. Helping with literary issues also online also takes very little resources. Another item brought up. But yes, again, something for us to consider at this time where people are vulnerable and our desire to help people. And it's everything from that pot in front of Walmart to getting personally involved in the lives of people who are houseless. And Glenn, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing that with everyone this evening.
Thank you.